I never thought a baby shower would be the moment that changed everything, but sometimes life turns on the quietest moments: a hand on a belly, a glance between sisters, a whisper that sends you running toward the unthinkable. My sister Claire was 8 months pregnant. It was her first child, and even though we hadn't always been close, I offered to host a small shower at our house. It wasn't extravagant, just close friends, family, and a few homemade cupcakes. We played games decorated with soft pinks and creams, and for a while it almost felt like old times. She laughed the way she used to before everything got complicated, before she moved across the state, before we stopped calling just to say hi. My husband Michael was there too. He wasn't planning to join in, but Claire insisted. "He's an obstetrician," she said with a grin. "I need at least one man in the room who actually knows what he's talking about." Everyone laughed. He smiled politely, always humble, always quiet. Michael never lacked the spotlight. He believed in doing his work well, praying before every surgery and letting God do the rest. Toward the end of the afternoon, Claire stood and said, "The baby's moving. You have to feel it." Her hand pressed against her belly. The room went quiet. A few guests took turns, placing their hands gently on her bump. There were soft gasps, little giggles. "Here," she said, turning to Michael. "Your turn. You'll probably be able to tell if it's a boy or girl just by touch." Everyone chuckled. Michael hesitated, then nodded, stepped forward, and placed one hand gently on her stomach. And then he froze. I noticed it first. His expression didn't change. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his brow furrowing slightly. The room kept laughing and talking, but I saw the shift in his eyes. Something was wrong. After a few seconds, he quietly pulled his hand back, then leaned in toward me and whispered, "We need to talk. Outside." He didn't sound panicked. He didn't sound rushed, but there was something in his voice that made me drop my plate on the table and follow him without question. Once we were outside, I asked, "What is it?" He looked back toward the house, then at me. "Call an ambulance, he said, "right now." "What? Why?" He paused. "I don't want to alarm her, but something isn't right." When I felt her stomach, there was resistance and an irregular rhythm. It didn't feel like a normal fetal movement. My heart started racing. She said everything's been fine. He shook his head slowly. "I can't explain it. I just know what I felt. It could be a complication with the placenta or the baby's position. And if I'm wrong, thank God. But if I'm right," he didn't finish. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and dialed. Inside, Claire was still laughing with our cousins, completely unaware. When the EMTs arrived, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Just tell her it's a precaution," I said. "Don't scare her." Michael rode in the ambulance with her. I followed in the car, heart pounding, hands shaking the whole way. I couldn't stop thinking, what if we hadn't hosted the shower? What if she'd gone home that night without anyone noticing? What if Michael hadn't said anything? What if it was already too late? That ride was the longest 20 minutes of my life, and I knew nothing would be the same after this. The hospital lights always feel colder at night, even though I wasn't the one in the ambulance, even though I wasn't the patient. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my heart, it just kept pounding. I parked in the emergency lot and rushed inside. By the time I reached the intake desk, they already knew who I was. "Claire Reynolds," I said breathlessly. She was brought in just now, pregnant." The nurse nodded. "They're getting her prepped for fetal monitoring and an emergency scan. She's in room 7. Your husband's with her." Room 7, that number stayed in my mind for some reason. I hadn't prayed in years. Not really, but standing there, unable to breathe, I whispered in my heart, "Lord, if you're still listening, please let her be okay. Let the baby be okay. Just help us." I peeked through the door. Claire lay on a bed, her eyes wide and scared. Michael stood beside her, holding her hand gently. He was whispering something to her, his voice soft, calming, the way he spoke to women in labor when they were afraid. The way he always carried peace in his presence, even when chaos loomed. I stepped in quietly. Claire turned to me and, "What's happening?" she asked, voice shaking. "They're not telling me anything. They said it's just a precaution, but Michael looks scared. He never looks scared." I sat beside her and took her other hand. "It's going to be okay," I said, even though I didn't know, even though my own fear was suffocating me. She squeezed my hand. Minutes later, the OB on duty came in. Dravaz, an older woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense tone. "We're running a fetal ultrasound now," she said, "but initial scans show something concerning." Claire tensed. "What is it?" Dervas glanced at Michael and then back to Claire. "There's a partial placental abruption," she said gently. "That means the placenta is starting to separate from the uterine wall. It's early and we've caught it fast, which gives us a good chance at stabilizing everything." Claire's lips trembled. "Is the baby okay?" "We're monitoring closely," Darvas replied. "There's a heartbeat. We've got a chance to slow this down with bed rest and close observation, but you need to stay here for the next few days." Claire nodded slowly, then looked at Michael. "How did you know?" He stepped closer. "When I touched your belly at the shower, I didn't feel movement where I expected, and there was tension, like the baby wasn't positioned correctly." She blinked. "You felt that just by touch?" He nodded. "I couldn't ignore it. Something just felt wrong." Claire started crying, silent, heavy tears. I moved to hug her, but she whispered, "I almost didn't come today. You know that? I was going to cancel. Said I was tired, but something in me said to go, and now I'm here." Michael sat beside her and took her hand again. "Sometimes," he said softly, "God whispers in ways we don't understand. But when we listen, he protects." The room was quiet. No one had anything to add. Just the hum of monitors, the rhythmic beeping of life, and a single prayer hanging in the air. That night, I stayed at the hospital. Claire was admitted to a private room for monitoring. I brought her a blanket from home, rubbed her back when she cried, and finally, we talked, really talked, about the baby, about the years we'd lost, about how things had gone so wrong between us, and somewhere between the tears and the laughter, we started finding our way back. Outside in the waiting area, Michael sat reading a Bible app on his phone. When I walked over, he looked up and smiled. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Thank you," I said, "for listening, for acting, for saving her." He put his hand on mine. "I just did what I was trained to do. The rest was all God." The next morning, the hospital room smelled like orange juice and hospital sheets. Claire hadn't slept much, neither had I. She dozed in and out while nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting monitors, whispering updates. Michael had gone home to shower and grab a few things, but he promised he'd be back by noon. I sat by the window watching the sun stretch across the parking lot, thinking about everything that could have happened if we hadn't called. Around 9:30, Dr. Voss returned with a clipboard. A resident following closely behind her. Claire sat up a little. "Did something change?" Dr. Voss sat on the edge of the bed, her tone calm but serious. "We've confirmed it. It's a Class Y placental abruption," she said. Claire blinked. "What does that mean?" "It's the mildest form. Right now, the baby is stable, your blood pressure is holding, and there's no sign of fetal distress. That's the good news. The concern is that it can change quickly." Claire looked down at her belly. "So, what happens now?" Dr. Voss took a deep breath. "We're keeping you here under close observation for at least 72 hours. You'll be on continuous fetal monitoring, IV fluids, and complete bed rest. If anything changes, bleeding increases, fetal heart rate drops, we may have to deliver early." Claire closed her eyes. "I'm only 33 weeks, she whispered. "We know," the doctor said gently, "but you're in the right place. And because of your brother-in-law's quick reaction, we caught this early." I reached over and held Claire's hand. She gripped mine tightly. After they left, the room stayed quiet. The only sound was the soft whoosh of the fetal monitor and the steady thump of her baby's heart. She stared at the ceiling, her eyes full of thought. "I've never been this scared," she finally said. I nodded. "I know." She turned to me. "How did Michael even know? Is that normal to just feel something like that?" I smiled softly. "He told me once that sometimes medicine isn't just about what you see, it's what you feel, what you hear in your gut. He said the body speaks, and if you're quiet enough, you'll hear it whisper." Claire wiped her eyes. "He always was calm, even yesterday." I nodded again. "He prays before every surgery, even if it's just in his head." Maybe that day he just heard what he needed to hear. Claire didn't say anything for a while, but later, when a nurse came in to adjust her IV, she whispered, "Do you think God warned him?" I looked at her. "I think God still speaks," I said, "and sometimes he speaks through the hands of someone who listens." By noon, Michael was back, freshly showered, quiet as always. He brought a small thermos of soup Claire liked and a book about newborns. The nurses let him stay longer because of his medical credentials. That night, he stayed with her while I went home to sleep for a few hours. At home, I stood in the nursery I'd been building for my own child. Michael and I had been trying for 2 years with no success. We hadn't told anyone, not even Claire. It had been our private aches, and I looked at the crib in the corner, the mobile I hadn't hung yet, and wondered if we were meant to be parents in a different way. Maybe this was part of that answer. Before bed, I called the hospital to check in. Michael answered, "She's resting. Baby's heartbeat is steady. Everything's holding." I exhaled deeply. "Good. Also," he added, "Claire asked if we'd pray together." My breath caught. "She did?" He chuckled. "Surprised me too, but I think yesterday shook something loose." That night I lay in bed with a hand on my heart, and I prayed again. Not just for Claire or the baby, but for whatever came next, whatever story God was writing behind the scenes. Hospitals have a strange way of slowing time, and you check the clock more often. Every beat feels louder, every minute stretches into 10. By the third day, Claire's condition hadn't worsened, but it hadn't improved either. The doctors were optimistic but cautious. The baby's heart rate was steady, but they monitored it around the clock. Michael stayed most nights. I came in each morning with coffee and warm socks from home. We made small talk to fill the silence, but the worry hung in the air like fog. One afternoon, while Claire slept, Michael and I stepped out into the waiting room. We sat across from each other, two people who shared a home, a life, and lately a quiet sadness neither of us dared to speak aloud. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. "She's holding on," he said quietly, staring at the vending machine, "but I keep thinking how close it came to going unnoticed." I nodded slowly. "I've been thinking that too, about what might have happened if we hadn't hosted that shower." Michael folded his hands. "I've worked in this field for almost 2 decades. You develop instincts, yes. But that moment, it wasn't just instinct. It felt like something else, like I was supposed to know." I studied him for a moment. "I believe that." He looked at me. His eyes were tired but steady. "You do?" I nodded. "I think when we're still enough, when we're quiet enough, God nudges us. Maybe it wasn't a loud voice, but it was enough." He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in a while, he smiled. After a moment of silence, I spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever wonder why it hasn't happened for us?" The question hung in the air. I hadn't planned to ask it, but it was there, and heavy. Michael didn't flinch. "Every day," he said, "but I also remind myself that love isn't measured by biology." I looked down at my hands. "It still hurts. I know." He reached over and took my hand. "But maybe, just maybe, we were needed here right now for this." The doors to the maternity wing opened suddenly, and I turned. A nurse walked out briskly, scanning the room. "Mrs. Reynolds?" "Yes?" "Your sister's asking for you." I rushed back to the room, heart pounding. Claire was awake, her eyes red. "Hey," I said gently, "everything okay?" She nodded slowly. I had a dream." I sat beside her. "A dream?" "Yeah, it felt real. I was holding the baby. She was healthy. We were all together, and even Mom." Our mother had passed away years earlier. "She smiled at me in the dream," Claire whispered. "She said, 'It's not time yet, but she'll be fine.'" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I think it was more than just a dream." I nodded. Maybe it was. That evening, Claire asked if Michael would read her a psalm. He pulled out his phone, sat beside her, and softly read, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the seas." Psalm 46. Claire closed her eyes and let the words settle. I watched her chest rise and fall in rhythm with the beeping monitor, life pulsing, hope growing. In that moment, I realized something. Even in the waiting, especially in the waiting, grace has a way of finding us. Claire made it to day 5 without any major changes. The doctors were amazed. Most patients with a partial placental abruption would have shown signs of deterioration by now. Pain, bleeding, a drop in fetal heart rate. But not her. "She's stable," Dervos said with a smile, "and the baby's holding strong. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is the kind of progress that gives us room to breathe." Claire cried when she heard the news, so did I. For the first time in days, the fear that clung to our every moment started to loosen. Later that afternoon, Claire and I sat in her hospital room, the blinds open, letting in the late sunlight. She looked over at me quietly. "You know, I thought I had everything figured out," she said. "A steady job, a baby on the way, a new place to live, but this reminded me I'm not in control." I nodded. "None of us are." She hesitated before continuing. "I used to think your faith was a crutch, something you held on to because life didn't give you other answers. But now," her voice broke a little, "now I see its strength, real strength." I didn't say anything right away, just reached over and held her hand. "You don't have to have all the answers," I said gently. "God doesn't ask us to understand everything, just to trust Him, even when it's hard." She looked down at her belly and smiled through tears. "I think I'm ready to try." That evening, Michael came by again. Claire asked him about the heartbeat monitor, about what to expect after the baby was born, and whether she could still try for a natural delivery. He answered everything patiently, clearly, like he always did. And then, without warning, she asked, "Michael, do you ever wonder if you were supposed to be a dad?" The question hit both of us like a stone dropped in still water. Michael looked at her, then at me, and he said with no hesitation, "All the time. But lately, I've started to believe it doesn't always look the way we expect. Being a father isn't just about blood, it's about presence and love, and showing up when it matters." Claire turned to me. Would you consider being godparents?" The room went quiet. Michael blinked. I stared at her, stunned. "You're serious?" I asked. She nodded. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know this baby will need people like you, and if something had happened, I would have wanted her with you." I couldn't stop the tears. Neither could Michael. "Yes," I said, choking on the word. "Of course, yes." The next morning, we all gathered in Claire's room as the sun rose. The doctor came in with a new update. "If things stay stable for another 24 hours, we might be able to send you home for bed rest," she said. Claire gasped. "Really?" Dr. Voss smiled. "You've done better than we expected, and the baby's heartbeat is strong. We'll keep monitoring from home, and if needed, bring you back for delivery." It felt like a miracle, because it was. Before leaving that evening, Michael placed a hand gently on Claire's shoulder. "Take care of both of you," he said with a smile. She grinned. "And don't worry," she replied. "If anything changes, I'll be the first to text you." We all laughed. For the first time, the fear was gone, replaced by something much stronger. Hope. That night, Michael and I stood in our kitchen, the lights dim, the house finally quiet. He wrapped his arms around me and rested his chin on my head. "She's gonna be okay," I whispered. "Yes," he said, "and so are we." I looked up at him. "I think we needed this, not the scare, but the reminder." He nodded. "To love, to let go, to trust again." And as we stood there, the house still, the world slowing down, I realized something. Sometimes new beginnings don't come with big announcements or fireworks. Sometimes they come quietly, in hospital rooms, whispered prayers and late-night embraces. Claire was released the next evening. The doctors gave her strict instructions: no lifting, no stress, no walking unless necessary. Michael helped review her discharge plan in detail, asking all the right questions, just like a big brother would. When we got her home, the guest bedroom was already prepared, pillows stacked, a monitor ready, soft music playing from a speaker in the corner. I never thought I'd see my sister living in my house again, but this time it felt right. It felt full circle. A few days passed. Michael went back to work, and I stayed home to care for Claire. We'd sit on the back porch in the mornings, her feet up, her hands resting on her belly, and we'd just talk. About silly things, about serious things, about memories we had buried for too long. One morning, she looked at me and said, "Do you remember when we were kids and you'd pretend to be my mom?" I smiled. "You used to crawl into my bed and ask me to read stories." She laughed softly. "I think a part of me always felt safest when I was near you, even now." Then she grew quiet. Her fingers traced the curve of her belly. "I keep thinking about how everything happened. The way Michael touched my stomach, the way he knew. It gives me chills." I nodded. "Me too." She looked up, eyes glossy. "Do you think God really speaks that way? Through instincts? Through touch?" I leaned back in my chair. "I think he speaks all the time. We just don't always hear it." She tilted her head. "How can you tell the difference between your own thoughts and God?" I thought for a moment. "It's usually quieter," I said. "God's voice doesn't shout. It feels still, peaceful, but weighty, like you know it's not just you thinking it." She exhaled. "That's exactly what Michael said." That afternoon, Claire asked if we could all pray together. We gathered in the living room, just the three of us, hands clasped. No music, no distractions, just silence and then words. Michael prayed first. He thanked God for the timing, for the safety, for the little heartbeat still thumping inside Claire's womb. I prayed next, asking for healing, for trust, and for restoration, not just of health, but of relationships that had long been cracked. Then Claire prayed. Her voice was quiet, almost unsure. "God, I haven't prayed in a long time," she said, "but I think you were there that day. And maybe you've been there all along. So thank you for not giving up on me, on us, amen." When we opened our eyes, no one said anything, but something had changed in the room, in all of us. That night, I found Michael in the kitchen, sipping tea. He looked up with a small smile. "She's healing," he said. I nodded. "So are we." He leaned against the counter. "You know, I keep thinking about that moment at the baby shower. How quiet everything got, like the room froze for a second." I remembered it too. The way his face changed, the way my heart knew before he even spoke. He continued. "When I put my hand on her belly, I felt something tighten inside me. Not fear, clarity, like I had to act right then. No waiting, no second guessing." He paused, and I heard something, not a voice, more like a pull, a knowing. He looked at me. "I don't say that lightly. I've spent my life making decisions based on data, scans, reports, but this wasn't any of that." I stepped closer. "Do you think it was God?" He nodded. "I do now. Sometimes we talk about miracles like they're dramatic, like they come with a thunder or lightning or bright lights. But this miracle came wrapped in quiet, in a whisper, in a still small voice." Claire was now 34 weeks pregnant. She smiled more, laughed easier, and when she touched her belly, it wasn't with fear, but with trust. The baby came 2 weeks later. It was a rainy Friday morning when Claire's water broke. Michael had just returned from a night shift. I was making tea in the kitchen when I heard her call out. There was no panic, no chaos, just readiness. We grabbed the hospital bag and drove through the drizzle with our hearts pounding and prayers silently repeating, "Lord, be with her, be with the baby, guide every hand that touches them today." Labor was long but steady. Michael stayed by Claire's side the whole time. He wasn't her doctor, he made that clear to the nurses, but he was still the one she trusted most in the room. I stood on the other side, holding her hand through every contraction. And just before sunset, her baby girl arrived. 6 pounds, 1 ounce, tiny but strong, a perfect cry that filled the room like music. Claire sobbed the moment she saw her daughter, and when the nurse placed her in her arms, she whispered, "God, thank you. I didn't know if I'd get to meet her, but you made a way." We named her Grace, not because it sounded pretty, but because that's what the whole story had been. Grace in the fear, grace in the timing, grace in the silence, grace in the hands that listened. Claire recovered quickly. She stayed with us for a few weeks after the birth while she adjusted to new motherhood. The house was filled with soft coos, midnight cries, bottle warmers, and lullabies. And in the middle of all of it, something bloomed between us that hadn't been there in years. Sisterhood, friendship, forgiveness. One evening, as we sat on the couch with Grace asleep in Claire's arms, she said, "You know what scares me?" I looked over. That I almost missed this, that I almost ignored the shower, that I almost dismissed Michael's concern, that I almost lost everything. Her voice cracked. But I didn't, because someone was listening. I reached out and touched her shoulder. You were never alone, Claire, even when you thought you were. She smiled. And neither were you. Michael entered the room just then, holding a small gold necklace. He walked over to Claire and handed it to her. What's this? She asked. He smiled. It was my mother's. She wore it every day until she passed. I think it belongs with Grace now. Claire teared up. She would have loved you, she whispered. Michael looked at her. His sister-in-law, his patient, his friend. She already does, he said. A few days later, we gathered at our church for Grace's dedication. Michael and I stood beside Claire at the altar, hands gently placed on the tiny newborn, bundled in white. The pastor spoke about family, about protection, about divine timing. He quoted Psalm 91, He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield. Claire squeezed my hand tightly. Afterward, in the courtyard, surrounded by family and friends, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said, for the shower, for the bed, for being there, for not giving up on me. I smiled. You gave me just as much. She looked down at Grace sleeping peacefully against her chest. Do you think one day she'll understand how close she came? I nodded, and how much she was loved, long before she was born. Weeks passed, then months. Claire found a small house nearby and started building her new chapter. We visited almost every day. Grace knew our voices. She'd light up when she saw Michael. And when I rocked her to sleep, she'd press her tiny fingers against mine, reminding me that miracles don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper. We never did hang the mobile in our nursery. Instead, we passed it on to Grace. It hangs above her crib now, a simple ring of stars spinning slowly, a quiet reminder that when you listen closely, God still speaks.